What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction video. In this one we have, can India crush Trudeau's ego? I think that they can. I think that they're really capable, but we're going to find out. Before we do, if you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to smash that subscribe button, give that video a thumbs up. And if you'd like to support this channel by becoming a member, all you got to do is click that join button. Let's find out, guys.
India's relationship with Canada is worse than it has been in decades.
Credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India. Credible allegations that agents of the government of India were directly involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, on Canadian soil.
Khalistani extremists and terrorists are deep assets of CSIS.
The Indian government hired thugs to terrorize Canadians.
Because the country that boasts about eliminating terrorists, who openly say that there is no place for terrorism anywhere in Canada.
The glorification of death and violence and terror has no place anywhere, including especially here in Canada,
is harboring Khalistani terrorists in their own backyard. What has been surprising in this situation is the response of countries like the UK, New Zealand, who have stood with Canada and her terrorists. And we will discuss why. But in this video, you will also see the most surprising, intriguing, and perhaps the most important part of the India-Canada story, the insidious role of the USA, and how it has been pulling the strings from the background to put pressure on India. But the question is, why? Why is the US involved?
So you telling me behind the whole situation between Canada and India, it's been the USA pulling strings, the puppeteer the entire time? This is a perspective that I have not heard. This one will be interesting, because I got to hear what he has to say.
What benefit do they have in antagonizing India, a country they call a strategic ally? Well, this one's going to be a roller coaster, so strap in. The current diplomatic tensions between India and Canada are at an all-time high. The tensions have been brewing because of Canada's harboring of Khalistani terrorists and their sympathizers in Canada, who have been openly threatening Indian officials and embassies in Canada for years. The latest tension stems from the murder of Khalistani Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada in 2023. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau blamed India for Nijjar's death, but he has, till date, not provided any solid proof for this claim. Trudeau referred to this guy as a Sikh leader, but this is not a Sikh leader. This is a Khalistani terrorist. In 2020, the Indian government declared him a terrorist under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or the UAPA. He was allegedly involved in financing terrorist activities aimed at destabilizing India. He was also accused of recruiting individuals for terrorist training camps and supporting violent organizations in India. Recently, Trudeau stated that he would interrogate Indian diplomats regarding Nijjar's death, accusing them of conspiring against Canada. He makes this accusation when Indian diplomats are being openly threatened by Khalistani terrorists. So in response...
So you putting even more of a target on the diplomats of India without one shred of evidence. You don't say something like that unless you are 100% positive, unless you have all the evidence to back it up and the evidence has been presented. But without one shred of evidence, you say you got credible evidence, but nobody's seen it. Nobody's seen it. So how, you put people's lives at danger, dog.
The Indian government withdrew its diplomats from Canada and requested their immediate return.
India has decided to withdraw its High Commissioner Sanjay Kumar Verma and other senior diplomats and officials after the Canadian government named them as persons of interest for their alleged role in the killing of pro-Khalistani leader.
That's crazy.
Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar also expressed a lack of faith in Canada. So Akshay Kumar unfortunately has to come home and make more movies. Now, the Western media is portraying this as Canada forcing Indian diplomats out, which is misleading. The withdrawal was a proactive measure by India after learning about the threats against its diplomats made by Khalistanis from Canadian territory. Again, remember, to this day, Trudeau has not provided any proof to back his claims.
Not one bit.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has confessed that his government had no concrete evidence whatsoever when it initially accused India of being involved in the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
What do you mean?
That is legit. That blows my mind how you can accuse a country, how you can accuse diplomats of this country of something, a crime of this nature, with no evidence whatsoever. Is absolutely mind-blowing.
I mean, you have no evidence. You can't just claim something if you don't have any proof. Like,
Facts.
if that's the case, I can say that Trudeau really enjoys wearing women's underwear. And Jagmeet Singh and Trudeau are secret lovers. What's my proof? Well, let's just say that I have the same amount of proof that Trudeau has against India. So let's understand why harboring Khalistani terrorists on Canadian soil is a horrible look for Canada. The Khalistani movement is a Sikh separatist terrorist movement aimed at creating an independent Sikh homeland called Khalistan, meaning the land of the pure. Ironically, the Khalistanis only claim Indian Punjab, but not an inch of Pakistani Punjab, which is bigger and also contains Lahore, the historical capital of the Sikh Empire. I wonder why. It can't be because Khalistanis are bitches of the Pakistani ISI who funds and owns them. No.
Die.
That certainly can't be the reason. The Khalistani insurgency was one of the bloodiest terrorist insurgencies in independent Indian history, which resulted in the murder of thousands of Hindus and Sikhs who did not agree with the idea of Khalistan. It also resulted in terror attacks overseas, most infamously the Air India Flight 182 bombing in 1985, which killed 329 people and was the deadliest terror attack in Canadian history till today.
23 जून 1985 को खालिस्तानी प्रतीकतावादियों ने मॉन्ट्रियल से मुंबई आ रहे एयर इंडिया के विमान कनिष्क में एक टाइम बम रखा, जिसकी वजह से आयरलैंड के तट के पास विमान में विस्फोट हुआ और 329 लोग मौत के मुंह में समा गए। 9/11 से पहले ये इतिहास का सबसे बड़ा चरमपंथी हमला था। कनाडा के ब्रिटिश कोलंबिया में पीली पगड़ी पहने एक शख्स ने $3005 खर्च कर बिजनेस क्लास के 2 हवाई टिकट खरीदे और उसके साथ ही वैंकूवर से उड़ने वाले 2 विमानों में डायनामाइट और टाइमर से भरे 2 सूटकेस check-in कराने में सफल हो।
Thanks to the actions of Punjab Police and KPS Gill, known as the Lion of Punjab, the Khalistani insurgency was wiped out of India, and now the idea of Khalistan in India is pretty much dead. However, Khalistanis in the diaspora do harbor some pipe dreams, and Pakistan's ISI has been using various financial strategies to sustain the Khalistani movement. And what's been really alarming is how Canada has become a safe haven for these Khalistani terrorists. One of the big reasons behind this is Canada's lax immigration policies. After the Khalistani movement was finished in India, many Khalistanis escaped to places like Canada, exploiting their lax immigration policies. On top of that, the Canadians were getting cheap labor, so they were happy to look the other way. The Sikh community in Canada has grown at a very...
So after, the terrorist movement failed in India, it was snuffed out in India, and being funded by the ISI in Pakistan, because of course Pakistan wants to be that thorn in India's side, and try to destabilize India in any way possible. They decide to move to Canada, where immigration is lax. They know we're welcome here. Canada's getting cheap labor. Of course, the country's like, well, I know India's telling us that they're terrorists, that we shouldn't bring them in, but there's cheap labor. So Canada decides to make a safe haven for Khalistanis, and I don't know a whole lot about Khalistanis. He's calling the whole movement a terrorist movement. That is his words, because I need to learn more. But from all the videos that I have seen, there's been nothing good. It just sounds like they're absolutely threatening the lives of Indian diplomats, and there's a lot going on here. And so Canada becomes that safe haven for them, and India's like, hey, no, those are wanted criminals. Those are no. Canada's like, cheap labor.
Fast pace. In fact, since 1991, the Sikhs in Canada have grown by 400%. So the Sikhs now have big populations in important political areas in Canada, and thus have become an important vote bank for Canadian politicians. The Khalistanis have been able to hijack Sikh politics to a very large extent in Canada, and have been able to send many pro-Khalistani politicians into the Canadian Parliament. Politicians like NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. who has attended pro-Khalistani rallies in his past, who for a very long time refused to disavow the terrorists responsible for the Air India bombing, who was responsible for working with Khalistanis to share a fraudulent toolkit during the farmers' protests in India. Another one of these people is Liberal MP Sukh Dhaliwal, who have attended Khalistani events in the past as well. Manjinder Singh and Narinder Singh, two members of a Khalistani Gurdwara in Surrey who threatened to shoot the Indian High Commissioner, also seem to have a direct connection with MP Sukh Dhaliwal. You can hear Khalistani slogans in various Canadian political rallies. So how have these Khalistanis been able to create so much influence in Canadian politics? Well, two reasons: money power and political power. Let's talk about money power first. Many of these Khalistanis use the idea of Khalistan to portray themselves as political activists, to hide their true intentions, which is their involvement in the Canadian drug trade. Since the 1980s, many Punjabi Khalistani gangs have been established in Canada by gangsters like Bindi Johal and Jimmy Dosanjh. Gangs like Johal, Dhak Duhre, Sanghera, Mali Buttar, and Kangs. Over 20% are of Punjabi origin, despite Punjabis being just around 1% of the population of Canada. Think about that. In 2021, Toronto police arrested 20 people, including 9 Khalistanis, and procured drugs from them, like 450 kilograms of cocaine, 182 kilograms of crystal meth, 430 kilograms of marijuana, and 30 oxycodone pills, the street value of which was $61 million. In fact, Mexican drug cartels have also used these Khalistani gangs to expand their operations in Canada. These cartels use two ways to expand into Canada. One, use local gangs to expand their network, many of which are Khalistani drug gangs. And secondly, use long-haul trucking to transport their drugs across borders. And here's where things get interesting. According to the Sikh Political Action Committee, 150,000 Sikhs are involved in the trucking industry. Punjabis in general own more than half of the Asian-owned trucking businesses in America. According to the North American Punjabi Trucking Association, 40% of truckers in California are Sikhs. In the last 3 years, more than 30,000 Sikhs have become truck drivers. I hope you can start to connect the dots now.
I see the dots forming. I absolutely see the dots forming, and I see the lines in order to connect them. Yes. So he's saying that these Khalistanis are a part of the drug trafficking movement, and that's what they are doing in Canada. They have these gangs already. They only make up 1% of the Canadian population, yet was it 20% of the gangs, which is absolutely mind-boggling. But part of these drug trafficking movements, and how do they traffic the drugs? Well, they become truck drivers, it sounds like. So many of them, let's say 30 to 40% of truck drivers in California are Sikh. They're adding 30,000 more. Like, this is how the drugs moving, through the trucks. Wow. And this is all, and ain't nobody catching this. It's just going under the table.
And so it's very important for you to remember what I'm about to say right now. These Khalistanis aren't just terrorists. They're also drug traffickers that are bringing in harmful drugs and supplying them to millions of Canadians. They're bringing gang violence to the streets of Canada. It is only a matter of time before Canadians start dying of drug overdoses as a result of these Khalistanis. It is only a matter of time that ordinary Canadians start getting caught in the crossfire of this Khalistani gang violence. Maybe then Canada will wake up and act, but by then, it would have been too late. And now if we talk about how these Khalistanis have gained political power, we need to understand that it all comes from their control of various gurdwaras. Because to send local politicians and national politicians into the government, Canada has a system called the primaries. And many primaries start from the gurdwaras. And these Khalistanis use their money power and their gang power to hijack these gurdwaras. So then 10-20 Khalistanis that control these gurdwaras control all the religious donations and cash of the gurdwara, but also then have a lot of influence over all the families that visit that gurdwara. And also remember that a vast majority of Khalistanis belong to just one caste, which is the Jat Sikh caste. And a majority of Sikhs in Canada are from that Jat Sikh caste as well, which is why Khalistanis are able to do this caste mobilization quite effectively to then go on and control these gurdwaras. And so then they're able to send these Khalistani sympathizers into the government, like Harjit Singh Sajjan, who was the Defense Minister of Canada from 2015 to 2021, and who is currently the Minister of of international development. He's been accused of being a Khalistani sympathizer. When Trudeau visited India in 2018, the spotlight was on his delegation, which included several ministers and MPs with ties to Khalistani sympathizers. This led to a major embarrassment for Trudeau when it was revealed that Jaspal Atwal, a convicted Khalistani terrorist, was invited to a reception hosted by the Canadian High Commission in India. Atwal had been convicted in 1987 for the attempted murder of an Indian politician in British Columbia. Imagine that. This would have been like if the Americans visited Israel and invited the leader of Hamas to be a part of their official delegation. Now, obviously, this pissed off the Indians a lot. So much so that Amrinder Singh, the then Chief Minister of Punjab, who didn't even belong to the BJP then, he was part of the Congress party.
When I was in America, and next I was to go to Canada, but this Khalistani lobby got together, all these Sajjans and the others. I'm not going to meet him. He's coming to Punjab. Somebody can.
Sajjan means a defense minister.
He had publicly refused to meet Trudeau.
See, they really just came in and taken over. They sound like they pretty organized with the takeover too. It sounds like they got power, they got money, they got influence. And with those three things, you can do a crap ton. You can take those three things. You can take over power, money, and influence. And it sounds like they have all three of those things in Canada. Canada, it's not looking good. It's not looking good, Canada. Y'all should have listened to India when they tried to tell y'all are harboring terrorists. Y'all says, hey, they got freedom here. They got freedom of speech. They got freedom. And they just ain't looking good.
And accused him of being a Khalistani sympathizer. And as a result of the appeasement of Khalistanis by the Canadian government, Khalistanis have become brazen in attacking Indians and the Hindu diaspora. Attacks on temples, including vandalism, have created fear for the Hindu community.
Incidents of vandalism against symbols of Hindu identity continue. One of the biggest and oldest temples in Canada was vandalized and defaced with certain Khalistan referendum posters over the weekend. And what is shocking is that this is the fourth such incident by the Khalistanis in Canada in just this 1 year.
Already in 2024, there have been multiple attacks on Indian temples and multiple threats made against Indian officials and members of the Indian diaspora. So then there's a natural question here. Okay, well, the Khalistanis have a lot of money and political influence, but why would the Canadian government, and particularly Justin Trudeau, side with a Khalistani terrorist over a democracy like India? Well, here's where things get interesting, because Trudeau is using India as a scapegoat to protect his own failing political career. See, recently, Jagmeet Singh's New Democratic Party, which was a major ally of Trudeau, has withdrawn its support from the Trudeau's minority government.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau suffered an unexpected blow on Wednesday when New Democratic Party, which was helping him keep his minority Liberal government in power, withdrew its automatic support.
According to the Ipsos poll, only 26% of Canadians consider Trudeau a good candidate for Prime Minister, whereas 44% Canadians prefer his rival, Pierre Poilievre.
Ipsos poll done exclusively for Global News.
Trudeau done. Trudeau cooked. Trudeau done being Prime Minister. I tell you that right now. I think the world knows at this point that Trudeau is cooked and he will not be Prime Minister again. It's just a wrap.
Leader Pierre Poilievre remains the top pick for PM at 45%. Trudeau has 26% and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has 23%. Only 7% of Canadians strongly approve of Trudeau's leadership right now.
Trudeau's Liberal Party has also lost major elections in strongholds like Montreal and Toronto, weakening their leadership and chances for re-election. In fact, there is such little trust in the public towards Justin Trudeau that his own party members are calling for Justin Trudeau to step down. And this situation, this abject failure of Justin Trudeau, is pushing him to seek support from the Khalistani vote bank, the one constant that he has. And now, let's pivot a little bit. Because we've talked about Canada, but Canada's not the big dog here. Let's talk about who's really pulling the strings.
Talk to me about the US.
America's role in this entire kerfuffle. Because they're basically Emperor Palpatine from the prequel trilogy, pulling the strings from the background to cause the dominoes to fall in a particular order. See, the US is the classic hegemonic power, akin to the colonial powers like Britain and Spain. Hegemonic powers tend to behave like the schoolyard bully. And so America's behavior can be understood by understanding the psychology of a bully. According to psychology psychologist Albert Bandura, many bullies engage in aggressive behavior to establish and maintain dominance within a social hierarchy. Research shows that bullies often seek to exert control over others. Their behavior is driven by a desire to maintain or increase their social power. Bandura introduced the concept of moral disengagement, which bullies use to justify their harmful actions. They may rationalize their behavior by minimizing the harm they cause, blaming the victim, or convincing themselves that their actions are justified. This cognitive process allows them to engage in bullying without feeling any guilt or shame.
That's insane.
Bullies also
to be able to just turn your guilt off, bro. Like, to be able to turn your guilt off is such a foreign thing to me. It's absolutely crazy when you sit there and think about it, that they can justify their actions, or that they can justify their... Ooh, forgot what he said. It's like my brain knows it's on the tip of my tongue. Blaming the victim, justifying their behavior. Okay, and they say, oh, we didn't even do all that. We didn't do all that much damage. We didn't. I don't know why y'all are so upset. No.
Display intense narcissism. Narcissistic bullies believe that they're superior to others and often feel entitled to special treatment. This leads them to devalue their peers and see others as mere tools to reinforce their self-image. An example of this narcissism is America's narrative of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was a 19th century American ideology that held that the United States was destined by God, nature, and historical circumstances to expand across the North American continent. This belief justified westward expansion and underpinned American territorial growth throughout the 1800s. This term was coined by 1845 by journalist John L. O'Sullivan, who argued that it was America's divine mission to spread democracy, civilization, and capitalism across the continent. Basically, in simple terms, it was America's duty, as ordained by God, to civilize the Native Americans. However, in reality, they were using these esoteric concepts to acquire more land and more resources for themselves. And you can see a continuation of that narcissism in the Middle East as well. That it was the USA's God-given duty to spread democracy and American values in the Middle East, whereas in reality, it was a strategy to capture their oil reserves and protect their hegemonic interests.
And the USA does a lot that is God-given duty, or say it's God-given duty, but yeah, the USA, there's so many things that they've done to other countries, and so it's not always your God-given duty. Just be honest about it. Just be honest.
We've seen examples of this in Iran in 1953 when the US helped overthrow Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he nationalized British oil interests to help the Iranians. But the Americans didn't like this because it hurt US and UK businesses and America's God-given right to cheap oil. Similar thing happened in Iraq in 2003. The US invaded Iraq under the pretext of Saddam Hussein developing weapons of mass destruction. Despite there being absolutely zero evidence of any weapons of mass destruction. The US claimed that Iraq was behind 9/11 despite there being zero evidence of Iraq's involvement. In fact, the two countries that had the most involvement in 9/11 were Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, arguably, which had sheltered Osama for over a decade right under America's nose. But America, the great superpower, could not accept that it had made a strategic mistake in making shit allies, because thinking of Pakistan as your ally is like thinking Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones is a normal, well-adjusted individual. The goal is to control Iraq's oil resources and shift Middle Eastern power, shielded by the concept of America's manifest destiny. So the USA bulldozed the concerns of the UN and the global South countries and invaded Iraq, resulting in millions of dead Iraqis and thousands of dead American soldiers, ultimately resulting in the rise of ISIS and Iran becoming the foremost power in the Middle East, directly undermining American interests. What America did to themselves in the Middle East reminds me of this clip from a famous Indian-Canadian comedian.
You kill me, and fuck you! I kill me.
And then, you kill me. F you. I kill you. You don't kill me. You don't. I kill me.
Of course, who can forget Afghanistan? The US launched its war in Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks, aiming to dismantle the Taliban regime, which according to them harbored Al-Qaeda. But again, the Americans continued to ignore the real culprit Pakistan, which helped create the Taliban and was home to the world's most wanted terrorists, including Osama bin Laden. The war stretched for over 2 decades, causing widespread destruction, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Afghans and thousands of dead American soldiers again. And at the end of the day, America had to exit Afghanistan ignominiously, handing power right back to the Taliban, whom they ironically vowed to wipe out 20 years ago. But this time it was different. They also left the Taliban with tens of millions of dollars worth of state-of-the-art weapons that they abandoned when exiting the country with their tail between their legs. For a hegemonic superpower and for the greatest military on earth, America hasn't really won a single war since the Second World War, where ironically, the biggest victories against the Nazis were won by the Soviet Union. So now we understand the psychology.
I would have thought it was won more so by the UK, when the Germans tried to beat them in the air, and UK outnumbered and outgunned still somehow managed to defeat them with help from different countries. We know that Polish pilots, their squadron had the most kills of any other squadron in the air, I guess, force and so yeah. But I would have thought that would have been a more significant victory, but maybe it wasn't so easy.
America as a hegemonic superpower. Now we can begin to understand their actions towards India. See, the US wants to maintain its global dominance, and a rising India could challenge this balance. Jamie Dimon, chairman and CEO of JP Morgan, America's biggest bank, says India can become a $7 trillion economy by the end of the decade. And right now we see India strengthening its ties with countries like Russia and also forging alliances with Arab countries and countries of the global south. The US wants countries to align with America's global interests, lock, stock, and barrel. Like America's personal bitch, the United Kingdom. India, on the other hand, very much wants to be a US ally. In fact, I would argue that Modi is probably the most pro-American prime minister India has ever had. If you look at events like Howdy Modi and Namaste Trump, it seems like Modi does really want to develop a strong relationship with the US. But what's key here is that India wants to do it on her own terms, keeping her interests in mind as well. India's independent stance on issues like Russia concerns the US. But the US, being the narcissistic hegemonic superpower that it is, wishes to bend India to its will. They obviously want to avoid a military conflict with India, since India also has a gigantic battle-hardened army that just gave China a bloody nose in recent border conflicts. So the US is using other tools at their disposal. Tools like NGOs. The US has been criticized for funding NGOs and media outlets that seek to undermine Indian democracy. Many of these organizations were involved in the opposition to the abrogation of Article 370, supporting the farmers' protests, opposing the Citizenship Amendment Act, as well as the Uniform Civil Code. In 2022, Indian government cancelled 6,000 NGO permits who used to receive such foreign funding. The American government-funded United States Commission on International Religious Freedom releases report after report every year bemoaning the lack of religious freedom in India. Despite the fact that a non-Christian has never been the president of the USA, while India has already had a non-Hindu prime minister and a Muslim president. The US routinely hosts the leader of opposition, Rahul Gandhi, as he openly asks for foreign intervention in India to overthrow the democratically elected Indian government.
So the surprising thing is that the so-called defenders of democracy, which are the United States, European countries, seem to just be oblivious that a huge chunk of the democratic model has come undone, right? Which is a real problem. With regards to, and frankly, the opposition is fighting that battle, right? And it's not just an Indian battle. It's actually a much more important battle.
Please understand here, clearly what he was trying to imply is that since it is a global good, let them come in and intervene and preserve this global good. Isn't this what colonial powers were trying to do?
Where he routinely meets organizations that are allegedly connected to George Soros and Pakistani ISI. In April this year, Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who used to be a staunch ally of India, accused the US of trying to topple her government, and ultimately the Americans were successful in doing so, installing an American puppet named Muhammad Yunus.
I was going to say probably did. The US has been pulling this crap for years and years and years of installing who they want into certain places, overthrowing governments that were voted on by the people of that country, and the US comes in and say, you know what, I'm actually gonna put someone in charge that rocks with me. I'm actually gonna put someone in charge that puts America's best interest first. So
in her place. The US also played a key role in providing the so-called intelligence to Canada regarding the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The Americans apparently offered key context that helped Canada solidify their suspicion against the Indian government. This so-called intelligence, which still hasn't been shared, was shared through the Five Eyes Alliance, a network between the US, Canada, UK, Australia and New Zealand. So you can see that America is using the similar soft regime change tactics that it has used in countries like Bangladesh and many South American countries to cause regime change and install governments that essentially function as puppet governments of the United States. But India has sent a message that is loud and clear. Support for Khalistani terrorism will not be tolerated.
Come on now.
So-called allies. India is
Talk
very
to me,
clear
India.
that countries of the global South do not wish to be dictated and controlled by Western hegemonic powers. The global South countries like India believe that the world should be more collaborative rather than run at the whims and fancies of
absolutely should.
The USA, being the top hegemonic power of the world, does not wish for India to have an independent policy. They would rather have India as a vassal state, the way UK, Canada or Australia are. And India is pushing back. They've taken control of the narrative as well, leaving Trudeau scrambling to keep up. And it's becoming increasingly clear that if Canada wants to rebuild its international standing, especially with India, something's got to give. And that something might just be a new political leader. So I want to ask you, how do you think India has handled this political crisis with Canada? How do you think India should handle America's interference in India's domestic affairs? Do you see America as a long-term strategic partner? Do you still think that America and India should be long-term allies? What do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. As usual, guys, if you enjoy these long-form English explainer videos,
I do think they should still be looking for a strategic partnership down the line between America and India. I do think America has a history of overthrowing governments and putting puppet governments into place that are going to bend at the wheel of the U.S. I know that Modi and that government is not going for any of that 100%. And I do understand the U.S. would not want another power to compete with in the world, so they want to kind of hold them down, it seems. And I guess they're pulling the strings behind Justin Trudeau and then trying to do that. Y'all talk to me in the comment section. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. Check out the next one. I'll see you guys next time.